beat.
You got a jingle?
No, I don't know why I should. I'm just.
You have one job, man.
I know. I got one job and I never get it right.
It's the post pod. It's the post pod. I don't know. I'm running dry myself. Or pew 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 pew.
I should get my guitar. We can play. We should make our own jingle with the guitar.
See,
Yeah.
like you're actually the musician between the two of us. So
Yeah. Well,
come on, man.
Kind of. I'm not the musician, but I could figure something out. I'll work on that. I'll get the guitar and we'll figure that out.
All right.
Yeah. So Eddie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
There's so much energy. He's
so much energy.
He's so like. I remember when I first met him, I was like doing this apprenticeship that I did with him in Cube for like 6 months, and it really did transform the way I work. Entirely. And still, I use the hopes and fears thing, and we were talking about that. But it's really interesting. Like I kept thinking back to that line about if you were to design a high performance organization, like from scratch,
right?
How would you do it and work backwards from that? And what you end up with might not be what you have as an organization.
That's a good point.
And so it's funny because, and he talked about it, it's hard to change once you already have established a system and processes. And so you then would naturally look to like a startup point of view where you go, okay, well, if it's a startup, we need to focus on how we're going to grow. But the startup is like, no, we just need to find money. And so we're not really worried about how we're going to grow. And so it's almost one of those things where you're like, it's an afterthought for everyone. Totally. And then once you're too big, you get to a point where it's like, well, it's too hard to change.
Just leave it. So
it's interesting about like, where's the right opportunity to create the actual systems and processes around how the team and the functions to become a high output, high performance organization.
You know, it's interesting because for me, when he was kind of walking through talking about like a true virtual collaboration versus kind of like what a lot of organizations have today, then I think you really start realizing, well, actually
I saw your eyes light up actually when you talked about the document thing.
Yeah, because I think for me, it's like you're in a meeting. What do? You assign one person. Hey, Mark, do you mind like taking notes today? Yeah, and of course, there's tools today that you can kind of get auto notes and stuff like that. But I think for me, it's like when it's a shared document, everyone has an equal responsibility in plugging in the information. All of a sudden, that becomes a lot more tangible. And it's not that I interpreted something one way versus someone else interpreted something differently, right? So I think it kind of, I can see how that can bring people together a lot differently than what we traditionally do, because it's almost like we took our natural behaviors in the office and we've just translated them online, like through the tools that we have today. Whereas something like his platform is actually a little bit unique, and it kind of works around their own rituals, kind of really like what is it? Not the hypothetical, but like the synchronous sipping, I think he called it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like super interesting. I think you took a sip of your cup, and I was trying to find my cup so I could take one too. But you know, when you start thinking about it a little bit differently, you can see why the remote structure maybe isn't at its peak yet, or at least not across the majority of organizations looking to adopt it. So it was just fascinating.
So one of those rituals that he has is, and he's built all these pets. So a pet, for lack of a better description of it, is essentially a slide. And the slide is designed to generate a specific conversation. So there's a framework, like let's say like a SWOT analysis. That would be like a pet of some kind.
Right.
He probably doesn't have that, but there's things like that, right?
Yeah.
So you fill in the blocks. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And that's what he's meaning about those. I just lost my train of thought. What was it?
Talking about pets and structure, or that he uses that as essentially as a way for rituals.
Yeah. So the rituals part, like the right first, speak second is one of those things. So that's a pet that like he's implemented as a part of his ritual.
Yeah.
Um, and if you think about it, like it's fascinating because you have these opportunities to create inclusion and
Yeah.
we were talking about diversity. You bring diverse people together, but what happens often is you have someone who speaks first, never writes anything later. And we all have seen this where there's the person with the loudest voice is the one that ends up just having the
Being
most
heard.
dominant airtime.
Yeah.
And then you have all these people sitting in the room with diverse backgrounds and experiences and value to add to the conversation. And they never get heard because they don't speak loudly enough, or they can't think on their feet quickly, or they don't, what if for various reasons they're just quiet.
Yeah.
And so the writing first, speaking second thing makes sure that everyone has a chance to like write
Contribute.
down their, yeah,
Yeah.
contribute, write down their idea. And then
Hmm.
you literally go around, and what he talked about with spin casting is like you go around the circle and everyone gets a chance to say something.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so like, we don't do that. But
No.
Amazon, thinking about this, does do that. And that was one of Bezos's things where you have to write down something, and we're not going to have a meeting until everyone's read the document, and they read the document in the meeting room.
I wonder what was it, like the memo or something, like, and like
Yeah,
they don't have presentations there. It's literally
yeah.
these documents um
That
that
you have
get
to write
used.
your thoughts, right? And
Yeah.
then in the meeting, because everyone's say they're going to read it, but then they don't. And so
Nobody
in the
does.
meeting, you read the document so that then you can have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
So there is at least one example of like effective cultures or like uh, high performance cultures in the
Yeah.
real world in comparison to the world that he created. So it is
Yeah.
possible to do some of these things.
But like he touched on so many different things and spoke about them at a very high velocity. So even like my note taking, I can barely read it right now because it's just so much. But you could pick up on a few things there where culture becomes important, making sure that you're incubating and allowing that
Hmm.
um, that sense of what's the right word, shared accountability maybe.
Hmm.
um, but then it's almost like to actually, so even if you have a culture and you haven't built in the mechanics needed to either continue to foster that or grow that, then it's going to fall flat.
Hmm.
But he used, I think he called it the sliced bread, because
So
he,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so that's another one that kind of stuck out to me where it's like, okay. And I think when you're trying to build these teams for both a virtual setting and a hybrid setting or whatever,
Hmm.
there's a lot of complexity that's involved, and we naturally
Sure,
will just default to what's comfortable. But if
totally.
we're really trying to build these high performance teams, we probably do have to approach it a lot differently than we have in the past.
Yeah,
And this is where some of these methodologies, some of these his ideas actually would work really well
yeah,
in this new state.
totally. Well, like picture, and this happens all the time. Like picture a meeting room, remote work, back to the office.
Yeah.
Cool. If there is only one office, you can see how like okay, there's more comfort there
Yeah.
because in terms of like management and being all together and all that kind of stuff. But throw in a secondary office in any way, and you have a meeting room, boardroom where people are being piped in through that screen.
Totally.
Like, how often do the people on the other side of the screen get ignored?
All the time.
All the time. So all of a sudden, you're like, no matter if you're back to the office or not,
Yeah.
you're back to the same problem
Yeah.
of like, well, how do we include people? It is hybrid, no matter what. Like, it's always probably going to be hybrid. There's always going to be someone piped in. And how do you get value from the organization for having the person participate in that and
That's a
not
good
just ignore
point.
them? One of the things, actually, the Sleeping Barber, the name of the Sleeping Barber, the reason that I originally loved that story is because the idea between connecting, you can add value to an organization by just connecting
Yeah.
the silos. And so organizations are often drawn like a pyramid,
Yep.
and they're structured like a pyramid. And that pyramid reports to the CEO. And usually at the bottom, you have customers. And
Hmm.
then that's your your base level employee group,
Hmm.
right? The customer interfacing group of people. And so you design this organization around reporting up to a CEO instead of reporting down to the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so if you inverse that and orient to the customer, then you are very likely to end up with some other structure
Yeah.
that, because there's a customer that you're serving, and then there's internal customers you're serving. you're it flips the idea around how you add value,
Yeah.
because you're no longer just reporting up, you're reporting to create value for the customer, and that includes internal customers, which then made me think about the promise to the customer stuff that we were talking about with Roger Martin,
Yeah.
and im- how like important that is. If you are going to make a promise to the customer, then everything in behind that promise needs to align like a boxer's punch, not just like some kid throwing a haymaker on his lawyer.
Totally. Totally. What I loved about his comment, and the way I interpreted that, is at the end of the day, and it's things that we've heard throughout everyone that we've kind of interviewed. I think back to Andrea Olson, obviously the promise to the customer with Roger Martin. It really all starts and finishes with that. And as long
Mm-hmm.
as that you can apply that lens internally to your organizations, to the products that you're building, the service that you're providing, that's how you can be successful. And that's probably how you'll be able to maintain a sense of velocity, or at least a little more alignment to
Mm-hmm.
how the world is changing around us so rapidly. Because
Mm-hmm.
remember, he's talking the world after midnight. And that for me also, I don't want to say it painted like a dark picture, but it kind of like made me realize like there's some people or some organizations that are able to move quicker than
Mm-hmm.
others. Well, why is that? Is it because of their relentless focus on the customer? Is it their ability to kind of look at what's happening around them and really compartmentalize it and make it actionable internally?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I want to guess, and this is just a hypothesis, that they're probably a lot more closer to the consumer and the consumer's needs. So they really understand the
Mm-hmm.
research side of it. So when I think about how he said it, for me, it becomes like a no-brainer. And then you talked about inversing that pyramid, and now thinking about that, I don't report to a CEO. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I do in this function, but my responsibility is to the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
That should change the way that you think and you apply your strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many little nuggets in there. I
Oh,
agree with you though. Like yeah, it does, because yeah, the strategy part isn't about serving your boss; it's about serving the customer. And so, thinking about like again, Bezos and Amazon, like having a chair
yeah,
that represents the customer in every meeting is actually kind of an interesting ritual to like make that a visual reminder
yeah.
of why you're doing things and what you're doing them for. And it's not altruistic in terms of like we're all
Shouldn't be.
it's we're making a profit.
Yeah.
We're making that for this customer by serving this customer well, not by like making sure my boss thinks I'm doing a good job.
No, and man, well, it's for me at least. It's something. It's a very, maybe practical is not the right way to say it, but it's a very strong visual that if you can highlight it, bring that empty chair into a room because you have like an in-person meeting. You can it becomes a very strong visual reference to be like, so the person that's sitting here pretending to be the customer or hypothetical customer, what would they be saying right now?
Hmm.
Is this in their best interest? This is not in their best interest. And I know I've been a part of decisions that probably didn't think about it through the lens of the consumer um, in that moment, just
Hmm.
because we had to think about profitability. We had to think about, hey, we needed to save dollars. We needed to make all decisions that were probably on the opposite spectrum of what a consumer would want.
Hmm.
And maybe that's the altruistic aspect. It's like maybe not all decisions can be made, even though they should be. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's can be a
Yeah,
little bit messy too, but I can.
totally. The other one that I was as we were talking about like you know the red monkey, the red fruit and the blue fruit, and the monkeys all following, they're eating the same thing, and benchmarking. And I started thinking back to the NPS interview that we had. Like
Mm,
NPS is a perfect example of the following the herd mentality,
Yeah.
where it's not so much that people want transformation, but actually they don't. They say they want it, but they don't. They
Yeah.
just want to change enough that makes it look like they're progressing,
Mm.
um, in line with everyone else because it's
Yeah.
comfortable, right? And so
Yeah.
NPS is a perfect example of that. I mean, that 2/3 of all Fortune 500 companies use this metric,
It's a
and it
box.
actually doesn't do anything. It
Yeah.
doesn't measure any of the things that it was promised to measure, but you
Here
can
we are.
benchmark each other. And so here we are, right? So that's kind of a fascinating like example to me around like the herd mentality. And so I think it does take a lot of courage though to buck the trend and to
Here's to
be
the
the
crazy
one
ones.
third, yeah, and be the 1/3 of the companies that don't do that and don't follow the trend.
Even if that means that you're internal, and you're saying that, hey, great, I know we have NPS. We're picking on NPS again, but being that voice to say, hey, what are we actually doing with this metric? What does it
Hmm.
actually mean? What are we trying to measure? And we're using NPS to try to measure that. And I don't think that's a bad, like, to
No.
have that. And I think you need probably more of that, people that can kind of
Hmm.
um, question, how we do things, why we do things a certain way. And remember, anytime you enter in a new role somewhere, usually the first thing that they'll tell you is like, question everything. You know,
Hmm.
we've just been doing things this way for so long. We're probably just blinded by our own ignorance.
Hmm.
And I think there was a stat, or maybe it wasn't a stat. Like you start losing that ability to see things differently within the
Totally.
first 3 months,
Right.
right? Then you start becoming yourself conditioned to the way of working that, say, your new organization
Yeah.
is. So I think being able to maintain and flex the capacity to challenge things, I think, is
Yeah.
really important. Whether you're a mutant or
Yeah.
someone that's completely, has a few screws loose in their head, as Eddie kind of put it. I think for me, there's a lot of value in making sure that
Hmm.
you're incubating um, that sense of, of challenge.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because oftentimes those new people are a lot of times just by volume, the
Yeah.
young people in an organization, um, and that are asking some good questions
Hmm.
around like, why you do it this way? And often you get the response from someone more senior going, "Oh, you don't understand. That's the way things work."
Totally.
Right? And
Totally.
so dismissive. And so as a leader, that actually should be a moment in time where you go, okay, that's a really good question. At the knowing that there is a best before date
Yeah.
for information
Yeah.
around the way we do things. It's kind of an opportunity just to gut check and make sure that the reasons why you're doing things haven't expired
Yeah.
and that the best before date is still valid.
Still valid.
And then from that point on, maybe you extend the best before date, whenever those
Good
kinds
point.
of questions come up. It's interesting.
Uh, I don't know. This was a great conversation to start my day. I have to admit, I'm energized now.
Yeah.
Like, let's go. Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And we'll there's so many links to put in for him, but and that we talked about, but we'll add a whole bunch of those in here. But
This was definitely a different conversation than I thought we were going to have, and I was just blown away. I was blown away. I
I
loved
was excited watching it through your eyes because
it.
it's like seeing it for the first time
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
almost
yeah.
like traveling. I'm like, oh, this is
Whoa.
fun. It's like a time warp for me. I'm like, I remember like having that look.
That's my look. No, it was incredible, man.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you.
All right, V. Until next time.
Go chase profitability.
Oh, you did it!
We did it.
Pew, pew, pew.
Look at us.
I'm
It's
gonna
only
get my
taken us like
guitar soon.
over 40 episodes.
All right, take it easy, buddy.
All right, buddy. Take care.